I just wanted to give a wee kind of like announcement about emergency exits. So just in case of emergencies, do not go back this way. I will come over here and we'll all go down through the emergency stairs just over there. Thank you so much. We'll start in just a couple of minutes.
Hi.
Everyone. Hi. Welcome to this evening hosted by House Books. My name is Raha. Don't know me. My pronouns are she and her. And it's a real delight and pleasure to introduce and host Sophie Lewis, writer amongst many other things, to celebrate the launch of Sophie's new book, Enemy Feminisms. Sophie's literally just made it to the UK this afternoon, I believe. So fresh off the plane. I was like, welcome back to rainy fascism turf island. Although at first I was like, welcome to Scotland, and then I guess being like, oh wait, but is turf fascism? Maybe we could just default to enemy island. Is that where we are? And then talking about the book, I'm just going to say this, in case you're unfamiliar with Sophie's work. Sophie's the author of now 3 books. Before this, Full Surrogacy Now, Feminism Against Family, which came out in 2019, and Abolish the Family, a Manifesto for Liberation, for Care and Liberation, care being the important one. Came out a couple years ago, and Sophie is a writer. Her work appears in various journals like Feminist Theory, for M+1, Management Review of Books, and books as well. Sophie has a PhD from the University of Manchester, a number of other degrees, and teaches at the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research online, which is open to all. And I think one of the things I wanted to is Sophie's not like a tenured writer who's forged a way to kind of do this hard leftist graft of getting the arguments and ideas out into the world, and also with a way that's radical in your intellectual approach. And I think that's one of the things that's really refreshing about your work and really energizing about it. And this book's another thing to add that adds to that. So we're gonna chat a little bit about enemy feminisms, TERFs, policewomen, and girl bosses against liberation. It's a book that's really kind of tarrying with the negative, and we think, and I think it's I've been describing it as a veritable bestiary of I guess our some kind of clear targets, clear enemy targets who were in the feminist camp, and others who I think it's a real surprise to encounter just how low feminism can go, especially for those of us who kind of come up in this kind of third wave, and we always thought, yeah, feminists, we're the good guy, we're on the right side, we're on the same team, we're on the right team, and then stuff with transphobia, text, and we'll get there. And I think one of the things that surprised me was just how low, and also how high feminists can go in terms of what kinds of alignments with power. I think some of the enemy feminists who you describe in this book forged. So across the book we hear about I guess target expected targets, maybe the enslaved English woman who goes abroad, sorry, the enslaved, that's some scare quotes, I can't do scare quotes. Who goes abroad, the anti-racist, abolitionist, the civilizer, the KKK feminist, the black shirt policewoman, the pornophobe, the girl boss, feminationalist, pro-lifer, the adult human female. And laugh, let's laugh, you know, because I think part of we'll get there about the joy and the misery, the misery that the enemies have in mind for us. So Sophie, could you begin by telling us a little bit about the genesis of this book? I guess like what you think of like the project that you kind of set upon to that has led to this book to share with the world in terms of this argument of the alliances between feminism and our enemies in terms of who they might be. But yeah, the genesis.
Thanks, Matt. Is that amplified? It is.
You sound less loud than that.
Less amplified than that. That's okay. And also less beautifully, decked out for the occasion. So come straight from the plane. Thanks for being here. Thanks for hosting us and being in conversation with me. And thanks to the Lighthouse. It's really exciting for me to come and have a room full of people who want to talk about this kind of thing. It doesn't make sense to talk about anything other than anti-fascism right now, but luckily that's what we are talking about. The genesis of the project has to do with this troubling sense that it's not quite adequate to make that gesture that I think probably most people with an investment in feminism, which perhaps doesn't include everyone here, right? Like, not everyone had a, middle-class European white girlhood with that kind of subjectivation that comes through the Disney Mary Poppins movie and the sort of, like, well done, sister suffragette, we're grateful, all of this stuff. I have plenty of comrades who don't really have a use for the word or the label feminism and whose trajectories through the world, geographically, in terms of their experience as queers, as trans women in the house of feminism have not been such that that's the same sort of problem for them, right? And I do hope that in some senses this book talks past some comrades good, excellent, if it doesn't. But it is, I think, it is a thing in the culture where, we just suppress the idea that feminism's history has a deep intertwinement with racial fascism, with imperialism, with capital accumulation, and so on, even though it makes no sense that it would somehow not be molded by those things when it was forged in the crucible of those things, And I think the extent that I've seen the conversation manage to get to is a kind of, admirable, I'm not sort of dissing it exactly, it's just, a conversation about white feminism that apologizes for certain sins of the suffrage foremothers that have to do with exclusions, and which nonetheless sometimes, not because of the scholars driving this, but because of the way the conversation gets filtered through the Guardianista sensibility, ends up rehabilitating feminism as a simple good object that then, we can sort of tidy up or expand and still have as a synonym for good politics. But I actually think there's something stronger, less easily perhaps co-optable to say, which is that, given that gender itself is a bit of a clusterfuck of a concept and internally incoherent, perhaps historically the things that have been built on top of that concept in order to emancipate women have been capable of being so contradictory as to actually be opposites. They're actually seeking literally quite different things. Perhaps we haven't got quite as far as being able to think that feminism is a real feminism, rather than that's not real feminism, which feels much better on some level if you're wedded to it, right? But a feminism is a real feminism in many cases and is also in and of itself a racism or a fascism. So that's quite a different move. It sounds like a tiny tweak. In some ways in bed with the real baddie, like the real villainous forces in history. I would almost paradoxically offer that that it's a feminist epistemic move to say feminism is a strong enough force in history that it is actually responsible for things, including bad things. You know, and I've been trying to get my head around why there is an Andrea Dworkin revival in the US where I live amongst artists, and it's been going on since 2021, and I finally sat down and read her magnum opus, the very final Dworkin book, that seems to be rather memory hold and disappeared. It's not excerpted in the anthologies and it's not mentioned or remembered, and the reason why is probably because she's finally figured out in this book, which is called Scapegoat, what she thinks women should do, you know, after decades of writing the books that she wrote about pornography and rape. And the thing that women should do, she thinks, is Israel, Israel for women. And you know, she actually builds the argument on a very, very wrong look at the Holocaust and Israel, which is capable of seeing the intense violence, but which nonetheless offers the idea, which is quite breathtaking, that it's justified in the same way that a woman killing her rapist is justified. But anyway, the point here is that Dworkin's view of history is that women are basically not responsible for it. One day women will enter history and start being responsible for things. I just think this is completely wrong. I think it's really quite dangerously, dare I say, fascistly wrong to tarry with that, to flirt with that kind of innocence. And that's how you get to sort of settler, feminist, sort of enemy utopian imaginaries like that, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about both this desire to disavow the, you know, the sense of like to disavow the bad stuff, and that, you know, that we as feminists say don't want to be associated with, be that, you know, the far right, be that statecraft, etc. And next to that is the sense of that actually the thing that's really convincing about your book is that it's like, oh, there's no disavowal, you know, throughout the last couple of hundred years in terms of, I think, like Mary Wollstonecraft's like the earliest figure in your book. So kind of from this kind of like 70s, 90s period to now, there's plenty of feminists who were aligned with state power, with white supremacy, with different forms of enemies. And I wonder, I was saying to you, and I was like, who is the enemy, Sophie? But is the enemy in the room with us now? Could you tell us a little bit about the enemy in terms of its multiple formations and how we start to generate?
Right. So this is where, yeah, I'm sure we have so much to teach each other.
We're in Edinburgh, so the enemy's definitely in the room.
So, anti-fascism, you know, for me, seems to be in this context, or maybe every context, about a collective drawing of lines that you then also hold. This book clearly has to say something about coalition building and holding and keeping one another precious and safe and non-disposable. It, you know, the movement saying goes, you know, treat one another carefully so we can be dangerous together. Like the defining of an enemy, I think, has been, you know, an art that we, you know, we possess these skills to some extent. I think within spaces that, you know, that define themselves perhaps primarily as feminist spaces, there is a great deal of disabling or disarming sort of confusion about the fact that some enemies are feminists, right? It's almost as though, right, there is a taxonomical question here. Clearly, I've sat down and read a lot of books and decided for myself, because I need to work something out for myself apart from anything else. Does it hold water to say that, you know, imperial feminisms or KKK feminisms? Yes, indeed, that's in the record quite strongly, more so than you would think. Black shirt feminisms, you know, all these feminisms. Does it hold water? Can you go into the historical archive and satisfyingly make the case it's not part of feminism? I decided no, fine, but in a sense it doesn't. Like, I don't really actually care what side on this people land. What I care about is the fact that the sense that feminism per se is a characteristic of an enemy, is disarming us and demobilizing us and confusing us. Like, this is a time for holding anti-fascist lines. Sometimes the lines aren't even being drawn coherently enough, right? Like, people have thrown, migrant siblings and sisters and trans comrades and siblings and sisters under the bus. These are the sorts of lines that feminisms have been confused about on the basis that there's a lingering sense that sisterhood or something of that kind links us, that you don't fight with kin. Perhaps, from my previous work, I think lines of enmity sometimes traverse, spaces of kinship. Perhaps some of these figures are our business in the sense of, linked by a commitment to something to do with gender emancipation or liberation. They are, in that sense, our bad kin that need to be claimed by being fought. What if claiming bad kin sometimes means being willing to draw a line of enmity, which isn't about typologizing a person, right? Yes, there are stories about human individuals in this book, but I hope I'm more interested in asking us all to understand impurity as a characteristic of all politics, right? If I was simply saying, I have the right feminism, I'm a judge of feminism, and here are all these bad feminisms, like fascist, problematic, fascist, then I would just be repeating the problem that I'm identifying in many of these forms of politics historically, where they were purifying and purging. But the thing about anti-fascism, I think, in practice is, our movements are seeking to make non-fascists, right? That's what we're trying to produce, right? It's not about a sort of an ontological labeling of human individuals. Maybe you were standing on the right side of the barricade yesterday, and hopefully you will again tomorrow. But perhaps today, you're for some reason, you're
having a puritanical moment.
Yeah, you're having a moment where you decide that Islam is the enemy of women, or trans women are the enemy of women, or some such thing. And if you're standing materially on that barricade, then I think we need to actually get better at a certain kind of enmity, because that is part of having the bonds of comradeship and love sufficient and adequate to this moment as well. It is, it might seem sort of nicer to use different language, but you can't decolonize colonialism. You can't, the hard lines are actually a way of keeping us knit together, right? That's also what this book is trying to do. I think it's connected to abolish the family and full surrogacy now, because when you said tagging with the negative, I think, utopian process, utopian method. I guess I'm working backwards. In order to explain why my previous books were sort of giving us, I hope, a sense of feminist struggle through the centuries as a struggle in and against the private nuclear household. Feminism as the struggle to sort of positively supersede the family. Right? In order to really clear the way for that, I think maybe understanding what has been done in feminism's name, what feminism has been in bourgeois, colonialist, class worlds, the counter-revolutions within feminism actually that seek to sort of push down the undercurrents of feminism, right? That's also perhaps necessary.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to join us back to this idea of the purity politics, and one of the things that and also it's really moving to speak now in relation to having with you about spoken for the past couple of weeks, and the synthesis you do as you're talking, which is very clearly situated in relation to your broader work, thinking about especially around arguments in Welsh family, but not limited to that. But that get joined up in reading Enemy Feminisms is, from the outset, this alliance of bourgeois feminists, bourgeois women with, on one hand, a desire of appeal to the state for enfranchisement between black suffragettes, and then the degree of alignment and how that kind of unfolds at different historical moments or between different figures, which is to say, feminism already appears as a tool of the civilizer, but as a key element of the white supremacist project to maintain its, to even argue that it's socially progressive, while simultaneously being either directly colonial or, in the case of the KKK kind of branch of feminism you write about, directly involved in like anti-black statecraft lynching, and also these kind of like white utopian projects of community as well. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about specifically, I think, some of these dynamics around this, because it especially feels like it's like, okay, so the enemy is clearly white supremacy, and the part of the way that I mean, this begins with Wollstonecraft and kind of continues throughout the book as well, being like, part of the problem is that these white feminists understand their oppression, understand the oppression of women, by which they primarily mean like enfranchised middle class, I don't know, enfranchised is the wrong word, like middle class bourgeois white women, through the metaphor of slavery, and how slavery is the framework of understanding that simultaneously means that it's used analogously in a way that I think we continue to see today in terms of how racial oppression is used analogously to explain other forms of social struggle, in a way that means that there's no cognicizing of anti-black or of anti-blackness or of black struggle as well in particular. And I guess it's kind of like, on one hand it's like thinking, okay, saying something used as a metaphor is like, that's a linguistic move, right? But then like that's actually happening conceptually in how the grammars of this politic encode itself, and then how it gets to justify itself in relation to the state.
Right. Gosh, now, do you think we're getting too academic?
That's
I thought you were going to ask me to read.
Oh, okay, we can do that too. But maybe on that note.
Yeah. No, I mean, okay, no, I think that's also referring here to the way that Western feminism's opening words were quite substantially, by analogy, to the enslaved man, right? This was the main metaphoric resource, right? And then there was also the oppressed Oriental woman and man that Mary was. If we're going to go with Anglophone feminism, so opening words, which is a problematic starting point in itself, but this is also an inheritance that matters if we're going to be, I suppose you could condense the the point about, can we have feminism without these fascists? Can we say that that feminism is Mary Wollstonecraft is not fascist, by the way. I'm warming up when I talk about her. I'm very much not trying to throw Wollstonecraft, like, jettison her. She's so fascinating, right, with her like strange horniness and her like disgust at that, and it's just there are resources she provides for which then ricochet over the decades and get taken up by, yes, in some cases literal clanswomen who, in the US context, the only political party that supported the radical wing of feminism in 1923, as in Alice Paul's Equal Rights Amendment, right, was the KKK. Like, there was kind of militancy about a certain kind of Protestant, anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish, anti-black lynching project that was going to cleanse the nation with a supreme womanhood. Klansmen had to, swear allegiance to the fullest equality of women, compatible with with racial dignity or something like that. But in the UK context, meanwhile, it's very interesting. Liberal historiography is uncomfortable about this, but you know, the estuary that forms between the ex-suffragettes, as in the WSPU, right? This is not the only suffragist organisation in the record. It's the one that gets remembered the most because of its iconicity, right? It also does not get remembered as a paramilitary organisation. I'm not anti-violence. However, I think it's something that needs to be, you know, discussed more in light of the suffragette organisation, the WSPU's authoritarian structure and extreme rightward lurch on the outbreak of the Great War, that it was a terror-oriented. I don't know if the word terrorist can be used by us, by the left, by the revolutionary left. I'm sort of doubtful that it's a usable word, but I still use it because in the book I made the decision to use terrorist about what the suffragette organisation was seeking to achieve. At the end of this sort of story, you know, the great suffragist British feminists decided to completely, you know, take out the bombs, as they put it, right? This is a literal quote, you know, there's literally leave out the bombs, but they, you know, they were planting nitroglycerin bombs around the place to the same, you know, level as the IRA, right, during the 1939 S plan later, and this is not something I was taught as a schoolgirl. I don't know about you. I was taught that there was maybe some window breaking, but I think it's interesting that people who were adventuringly, you know, bombing the shit out of politicians in the name of votes for women, then in the whiplash of the Great War and its aftermath, turned paradoxically to a form of intense sort of state backing, statecraft seeking, battle, like literal truncheon-wielding cop feminism that was then often signing itself up into the literal British Union of Fascists. The new Mrs. Pankhurst, I kid you not, was, in many ex-suffragettes' opinion, Sir Oswald Mosley, right, the baronet who founded the British Union of Fascists. In many books about this, liberal feminists are awfully upset, right? They don't, they kind of say up front, there is no such thing as feminist fascism or fascist feminism. You just can't have that, and that's the starting point. And that doesn't seem like a super good starting point if you're going to start looking at something. And I think that maybe we should find out and allow ourselves to, you know, assess that claim. But this is the sort of way that feminism is treated. Like, what if we did allow something about the relationship between liberalism and fascism to percolate, to be received from history? What if we allowed ourselves to ask the question about why people who were veterans in Pankhurst's paramilitary thought that the future of women's liberation was in the fascist corporate state? History and, you know, intra-feminist counter-revolution repeats itself. We are in a moment now too where I think there are plenty of fascist offers being made to women who may or may not define themselves as feminists, right? Fascism was making veteran suffragists a real offer in the interwar period all across Europe, and I think the same can be said about our current moment as well. I'm sorry, this was not a direct response to everything you said, but
I was going to ask if you want to read.
yeah,
Maybe we
fantastic.
should read a bit from the chapter on police women.
On police women?
Yeah, I think because we're there. I think it's a really interesting hint because it's so clear to watch Emily Pankhurst and others so visibly switch sides kind of in this moment, to go from bombing the state to supporting the state.
The story in that chapter is too spread out. You can find this story also in an essay called Lipstick on the Pigs, which tries to make sense of how Kamala Harris was being touted as feminism's great hope as the cop against the felon in her campaign. I mean, maybe since you, okay, I'll do the first one. If I told you that one of Emily Pankhurst's hardcore terrorism campaign coordinators went on to invent women's policing and made it go global. Would you believe me? Or perhaps you already intuited a deep link of this nature between Anglo-feminism and literal carceralism. After all, cop feminism is the air we breathe in the age of Kamala Harris, California's top cop, or former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, former president of the Chicago Police Board, and London Metropolitan Police Commissioner Cressida Dick. During the anti-police uprising of 2020, a slew of op-eds from Ms. Magazine to CNN called for police departments to hire more women. Let's add women and stir has been pleaded for as an alternative to abolishing the police in America since the mere lynching of Rodney King by cops in 1991. The feminism of cops itself, though, goes back over a century. In her book, Why Would Feminists Trust the Police?, Leah Cowan tells its history in relation to a fantasy of policing by consent. It's a vision of unpatriotic masculinity soothed into submission by uniformed womanhood, or at least womanhood with a badge. The colonial vision of social work that conjures is armed, yet sensitive. Our culture is saturated with these social workers, weary, gun-toting heroines of carceral gender progress, glamorous avatars of the thin blue line. I think the story, I have not read from that chapter before, so I think to get into it, it would take, but this chapter is about, in part, its example case is a figure called Mary Sophie Allen, who is extremely interesting, I think, to think about. How did women's policing, which was a thing invented by a literal supporter of Hitler in this country, become something so associated with liberalism? I don't so much know about this country because I sound like I grew up here and I absolutely did not. It's just a curse. My parents curse on my syllables and my tongue. But
I mean, it's the curse of the crown.
Right. But in the US, it's not like Republicans are interested in women's policing classically. It's a Democrat position. It's a liberal politics. So how did that? I'm partly asking the question: how did this, come from Nazism, eugenic ideas about what will help the world? It's ex-suffragette terrorist campaigners turned armed wing of the state. How did it go from there to Kamala, basically? Not that, well, I suppose now she's a footnote in history, but it was nonetheless, a question worth asking. I wanted to read a paragraph from the beginning that gets at what I was trying to say about claiming bad kin, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
They say that to understand all is to forgive all, but if this is true, then a commitment to impurity in politics, a commitment I think of as key to anti-fascism, must walk hand in hand with the courage to draw lines and fight people, if necessary, even kin. In other words, feminists who, like me, are committed anti-fascists, or anti-fascists who are also feminists, as they must be, need to know the difference between forgiving enemies and giving up the fight against them. This has to be crystal clear. It's a question of learning to more confidently oppose people whom we understand. A cop is still my enemy when she's my neighbour. We can feel compassion for QAnon moms and still liquidate their armory. We can forgive Tara for a pro-life feminist and still destroy the force birth judiciary and the anti-trans apparatus. I suppose what I'm kind of getting at here is this. It's part of an ongoing anti-fascist conversation about what the value is for our movements of going undercover or embedding, for instance, in with the Proud Boys, or I don't know, the English Defence League, or the liberal journalism often does this kind of thing, right? Maybe even leftist operations, right? We're supposed to bring back knowledge that is usable, right? And a lot of the time, I think, I've read movement reports back. Oh, this is how the Proud Boys think. Sorry, all my references are American, but I think what then becomes sometimes quite distracting is how that sort of human psychological process of understanding which is basically indistinguishable from a sort of forgiving. And fine, as long as we're still punching them in the face, That I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. It's not. It's very important to punch fascists in the face. It's extremely important, right? People seem to not know that. Where I live, they were using the F word, fascist, not feminist, and then having peacefully transitioning power to them and congratulating themselves for doing it.
That's one of the things that I think has been most profound in the last kind of 6 weeks, especially since Trump's inauguration, is to watch the normalization of this kind of extreme fascistic position. Keir Starmer was just in the White House a couple of days ago. And I think that sense of, especially thinking about what is the function of institutions in this moment, and to watch that degree of compliance, kind of the falling into line when, say, the swing of those institutions is actually about the swing of society as it frames itself, say, to align itself with the far right, or with the Trump administration, to be specific, say. And I think there's something kind of in there as well, which is also emerging in your book about the desire for the feminist alignment with power, or with state power, or with capital. We've been talking about the black cop feminism in this sense, and its history and its precedents, and in all of that, there's always this thing of it's not even inclusion, it's like the desire to just be in. Just lost in things in front of me. The desire for authority, to be in that position of authority. In the chapter on the policewoman, you're actually talking about people basically cosplaying as the cops, and having these moments of, okay, cool, you get to police this town, and that policing immediately tends to policing sex workers. And so immediately we start seeing is the authority of women in power over proletarian women, you could say, or specifically sex workers, where working class women, sex working women become the vectors of disease, both very literally in terms of how they're framed in the discourses of that moment, and this is obviously, they're way more, there are plenty of more contemporary examples than thinking, in the text you're writing about during World War I. But what was I going to say, that is next this flip of the question of purity, of this desire for purification, puritanical, in like the position of innocence, the state as the feminist line with the state as innocent victims, and then simultaneously they're banging the drum for war, or for borders, or for other. Maybe we should just pause on borders, because next up there is these questions around and thinking about the second half of the book, which I guess draws more specifically on archetypes that are maybe more familiar from the second wave and onwards, into the second wave feminism onwards. So thinking about the pornophobe as you frame it, thinking about the anti-porn feminist sex wars, thinking about the anti-choice pro-lifers, and kind of in your taxonomy that you formed in this book, also thinking about the girl boss. And like, let's talk about girl bosses. Let's go there. Because I think, especially thinking about expression around class
I
and
want
racial
to push back a
justice.
tiny bit. You know, you said who's the enemy, and then I think you
Yeah.
gave the answer. The enemy is clearly white supremacy. And while I'm not obviously not disagreeing with that, I think the analytic that I'm also widening. Yeah. Well, yes, and there isn't one tidy thing that goes through all the archetypes, but the closest thing to a tidy thing is this analytic of cisness, right? Which might surprise people if they think that, you know, cisness is something you can't place, you know, 200 years ago. You can, you absolutely can, right? Within feminism, I think I'm saying there is a counter-revolutionary movement that happens. There's Anna Heaney puts it this way: cisness is feminism's counter-revolution, right? It's internal to feminism. It's where. So, by the way, I just kind of wanted to make this move for you because I wanted to maybe just make a case for this being a love letter to feminism after all, right? I really belong to feminism. Maybe part of what I was working out was how to situate myself in a feminist subjectivity collectively with the ancestors, you know, of the proletarian feminism against cisness that has mattered to me and sustains me and sustains everybody I love, right? Because I'm not satisfied with this gesture of kind of disavowal on the one hand. That's not feminism, that's not feminism, that's not feminism, nor am I really comforted by the pleasures of self-castigation, like, oh, we made mistakes, Susan B. Anthony and I don't know, Millicent Fawcett were extremely racist or whatever. Okay. That, you know, why are they the story of feminism in the first place? Unfortunately, you can't, you know, the undercommons of feminism, the counter-canon of feminism is not as receivable in this straightforward sort of story under that name, right? Some of my favorites, they're all problematic. No heroes. Like, I really kind of believe no heroes, no heroines. It makes you stupid. But you know, Emma Goldman wasn't really into lesbians, unfortunately. But she also would have been annoyed if you called her a feminist. You know, she didn't like that word. It wasn't for her. It wasn't what she wanted to do. When you read her, I think you find feminism. But that's a kind of imposition that I'm making on her, right? But cisness is the sort of naturalization of assigned sex that cannot take place without a racialization. Like I'm not saying it does everything, but I think the white feminism conversation, its best iterations are great, but sometimes it becomes a conversation about, you know, mistakes that people of their time did, who also happen to be white. And then you can sort of imagine an inclusivity that widens the tent when the tent itself is kind of shit. and the plenty of things happening that were feminism materially happening all, you know, outside. I'm getting lost in this metaphor. It's always metaphors about cakes and bakeries and tents, you know. I think so. It's very, I think, exciting and clarifying, I found, to work with Emma Heaney and others, analytics of how feminism has always worked to smash cisness, and however has been met. And by smashing cisness, we mean, you know, a sort of potentializing of gender abundance, right? Jules Gill-Peterson talks about it very movingly in the context of mujerissima, the sort of street queen Brazilian theorization of the sort of femme-philic, as opposed to femme-phobic, valorization of the most woman, mujerissima, like the way that people can't afford to be women 24/7 because of their, you know, their precarious proletarian position, but who strive together to collectively valorize an excessiveness and too muchness and extraness of effeminacy, which can be like, but which really goes against this kind of reception, this legacy of a feminism that paradoxically is quite macho. It sounds kind of confusing if you haven't really entertained this idea before, because it's so striking and almost like provocatively contradictory to people's minds, right? But Western feminism's early words, and in a long tradition since then, have been peculiarly misogynistic, right? There is a lot of misogyny in a vindication of the rights of women. She even says it herself, right? She says, I actually really agree with the severest satirists of womankind, who say that women, as they currently exist in the middle classes of Britain, really suck. And I agree. Totally agree. They read novels and they like fashion and they like makeup, and this reminds me a lot of African people and also Oriental people. But what if women did not suck so much? That would be good, wouldn't it? And I'm going to call that feminism, right? This is like, you have to admit that's kind of a part of the argument. This is a sincere, central part of the argument, and that misogyny. Susan Guban noted this really early on, and people were really shocked. How can you call feminists misogynist, right? And yet there is this macho and misogynist and femphobic and whorephobic tradition. One of the ways we can slice this, we can bisect this, I think, effectively, while taking into account the centrality of racialization to this, is by talking about cisness. Because cisness is what enables us to understand that bourgeois gender relations actually afford cis upper class women, white women, a great deal of masculine priority, right? White women like, I don't know, Marjorie Taylor Greene, if you know who that is, or I'm going to think of a British example. Maybe you can come up with a great British example, but the way that white women can behave in deeply sort of femphobic ways in public, shaming, I don't know, the black representative Jasmine Crockett in the Senate for having eyelashes, you know? Basically, Jasmine Crockett is not a trans woman, but the violence being enacted there was a sort of, is illuminated with the concept of cisness. You get Marjorie Taylor Greene by being a CrossFit bro, does not incur transphobia, right? Because masculinity has always been available, as my stories show. Masculine priority, masculine violence has always been made available to certain classes of feminist womanhood, right? Sorry, you've been
No, I was going to say, I think like Christina Dick's a good example, like a good
Yeah.
example, especially when we think about the whole policing, the whole moment after Sarah Everard's death.
Yeah.
Actually, it's interesting because it actually shows that how galvanizing, when faced with the reality of those dynamics and these power dynamics, particularly in that moment in 2021, with dates of the Hour of the Night, that it can literally alienate an entire generation of feminists.
Right.
And that is when these dynamics are revealed, be that through critical analysis or be that in a political moment, through the kinds of the direct experience of the violence of policing, say in that case, that it can completely flip the script and create lead to a moment that is a consciously transformative moment for effectively a generation.
Yeah.
Time is ticking.
I'd love to have a conversation with
So, I've got a roving mic, Toxie's over here. I love it at my house when people when you get a 5-minute warning to think about your questions, but you didn't get that. Sorry, I'm not very good at interrupting. This is my this is a problem. So I didn't get to interrupt you, but now is the time if you have any questions. If anyone wants to, yeah, we've got two at the front.
My name is Natalie. And what is the colonial vision of social work you social work? Like, what, could you elaborate a little bit on what you think so you understand?
Yeah. In that passage, I'm referring to women's policing, which is a sort of very specific program, ideology, social engineering vision that comes in the Anglophone context, and it kind of is borrowing from Germany. But it comes from this person, Mary Sophia Allen, and her buddies who were card-carrying Nazis. I'm referring to it as a colonial kind of social work. It's a vision of women, uniformed women, uplifting and by uplifting they mean disciplining, policing for their own good. Other women who, in their degeneracy, in their assumed desire to be elevated to the type of, again, I'm trying to suggest cis womanhood, like the aspiration to cis womanhood, which is a womanhood that fantasizes itself as non-contaminated by circuits of monetary or capital accumulation. A womanhood that can fantasize itself as natural in the sense of not for sale. Its sexuality is not for sale. Its reproductive labor is done freely. This is a profound thing about why feminism has so often sort of expressed itself along this demarcation where sex workers are on the other side, right? In the past, revolutionary feminists said this all the time. They tried to recognize that contradiction by talking about marriage and prostitution as part of a Moebius strip, right? And you couldn't criticize prostitution without criticizing marriage. And then the marriage part of this really fell away. The sort of we will only get free together. The wives and the whores kind of sensibility. I think that falls away in the counter-revolutions in feminism, where instead you get a sex caste of police ladies who see themselves as social workers in a colonial mode, imprisoning and policing women for their own good.
I was just going to throw in and say that there is also quite a strong history around the relationship between the role of social work as a key element in colonial statecraft and colonial nation making. It's a really great book. I think it's AJ Withers and Chris Chapman called A History of Violent Benevolence, which is on this question as well. And so it's like these organs are all part of the project of the colonial nation state. Go. Here.
I wanted to ask about and sort of gently push back on what you were saying about Margarita Green as holding sort of masculinized power in the way that she exercises misogyny against other women. Mostly thinking about misogyny as in the way that I come to think of it, not so much like something men do, but something about the way that everyone, including women, is sort of trained to treat women, and the objectification of women and femininity as a thing. And I guess it seems like your framing is leaning into the sort of naturalization of masculinity as a sort of default neutral state, which I think is part of the way that masculinity is framed in the culture. And I guess I wondered what you thought about that. Or not very coherent question.
No, it's really coherent. I just really hope I do not do that, because I know that I at least try to take care very much not to do that. The point there about the Marjorie Taylor Greene example is not to suggest that women don't do misogyny or that feminine people can't do it. It's just to articulate I think we can understand why Marjorie Taylor Greene can perform certain mask-coded types of behavior in gender-conservative spaces and not suffer like transphobia by looking at something very specific about cis femininity and its whiteness and its bourgeoisness that enables it to be immune from those things, even as it exercises what we could call masculine priority. Not because I'm not saying Marjorie Taylor Greene is I did call her a bro. This was maybe the confusing thing. She was growing in that interaction. And I do want to insist on talking about fascisting more than, like, it's like when you view fascisting, we got to anti-fascism back, right? It's like, yeah.
There's the kind of the two sides in the sense of, well, it's not two sides, it's on the one hand how masculinity is kind of part of the modus operandi.
Yeah.
I think, like, especially in the kind of pre-1970 moment, in terms of what you're talking about here, that it's part of the modus operandi of feminists becoming part of the establishment and becoming authority figures, becoming part of the state, becoming actors within this kind of white supremacist colonial project. And then next to that is, in the more recent kind of examples that we draw, this kind of the flip side, which is the feminist discourse of femininity as the naturalization, claiming that this like maternalism that is part of nature, which is simultaneously re-encoding a cultural essentialism within gender that then also becomes the tool of cisness to say, actually we're the more maternal, in tune with the world forms of feminism, and that's like part of a key element of the pro-life kind of argument around anti-choice forced gestation, to use your phrase.
I really take the point there. There's a tension in the history of feminism between two intertwined strands, I think, that have to do with the assertion of women's autonomy and the assertion of like a transcendence of the sex distinction itself. And it's sometimes extremely difficult to know how to think about, like the non-naturalness of masculinity adequately while trying to attend to feminism, such a dialectic of sort of transcendence and autonomy. Does that sort of make sense? I think you're absolutely right, basically, to poke at something to do with the possibility, the danger of a latent like naturalization of masculinity as default for effects. Yeah.
We have time for one more quick question. So, anyone's got a quick question? It's two.
You first.
It is very quick. Can you tell us a little bit more about your relationship with Firestones? I think when you talk about heteroisation, you mentioned Emma Goldman earlier. I think she's mentioned in this book that Firestone is, and I think is very much present in the other two as well. So I'm just interested in how you discovered her. Like, I tried to read the dialectic of sex when I was like 19 and my head fell off. So that's quite interesting. Yeah, good interaction with her.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, Firestone, this kind of shooting star, she was thought of as her friend, like she sort of burned up and burned out, and was clearly in many ways. There's an autobiography coming out by someone I know called Lana Kovitz. I'm glad there's an autobiography of Firestone coming out. She clearly was in many ways a total dickhead, and I would have had like endless arguments with her about all kinds of things. But she, there's something I find very movingly sort of usable about her. Her confidence in collective, erotic, multi-generational, revolutionary potential. In her one book, well, it's called Airless Spaces. It's not her one book. Well, yeah, it's the one sort of feminist theory book she wrote, The Dialectic of Sex. She juice that I find much more exciting to try and bring back into our present than what seems to be the trend, the more what I would call femo-pessimist kinds of parts of the so-called second wave seem to be what people want to reach for. And yes, okay, Andrea Dworkin wrote like 12 books and Firestone only wrote one, but nonetheless, I think there's more in the dialectic of sex to fight with in a comradely way, and which I wish we did. But there are also so many others that we could be having an Amber Hollible or a Joan Nessel or a Pat Parker kind of revival. I'm writing about children's liberation next, and that's going to get into some of that part of feminism. It used to be more normal to talk about patriarchy as having two oppressed groups, right, children and women. And one of Firestone's great strengths, I think, is understanding the necessity of that dual, of that sort of two-prong fight back.
Great. We are out of time.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I know we could have talked for another hour and a half, I would say.
Would it be possible just to say the nice things about feminism I say at the end, just one time?
Yeah, that's
Just
good.
last
Amazing,
week.
nice.
That reassured me over dinner that despite there being all of these enemies that I'm talking about, it doesn't depress or deflate.
No, the book is really, I guess I'll put my 2 cents in it. As somebody, I spend so much of my time like trying to not talk about people who don't want us to exist.
Yeah.
And in reading a book about that is, the taxonomy of the enemies, I felt very like energized because the book is so clarifying in terms of being able to be like, okay, there's a really clear realignment in terms of what it might mean to commit to different kinds of leftist feminist projects, and also to just it feels quite easy to connect, especially in this moment where there's all these like neoliberal, especially black and brown women being mobilized by the state for right-wing agendas, or being at the forefront of those agendas, and pretending that they're feminists, and it's like, oh yeah, it's clear to understand, like this book's like me being like, oh, it's very clear how you're feminists, actually.
Yeah.
But that's not the ground that I'm going to fight you on.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
For many of us, feminism denotes the task of abolishing all organized scarcities, from the private nuclear household to the nation. It's the deprioritization of love via the insurgency of mothers of every gender against the patriarchal institution of motherhood. It's the decoupling of survival from the wage, the destruction of markets, the ecological insistence on interspecies responsibility, the decarbonization of every megapole, and the communization of continent-wide architecture, waterways, seed banks, and libraries. It's a local proletarian strike against work that always already gendered and stolen substance, otherwise called alienated labor, and it's a planetary revolution in values that prioritizes care over accumulation. It's a perfectly good name, too, for the horizon wherein works myriad, precarious, abject, wageless, mad, incarcerated, and otherwise remaindered victims are avenged. As a revolutionary movement, feminism abolishes gender as a differential while remaking genders as lush, interesting, and pleasurable difference. In other words, feminism carves out space for autonomous formulations of gender pending revolution. Also known to some as the revolt of femmes against cisness, of sex workers against work. Feminism is black quantum womanism, junkie communism, multi-species reparations, a queer glitch in the matrix of the given. Feminism is necessarily central to any meaningful anti-fascism, but this does not mean that it is always anti-fascist or even non-fascist. We can't just back rather our task is to conspire towards a world where women, if that word still exists, will still be horrible and not horrible just like everyone else, but where counter-revolutionary feminism has been stripped of its capacity for violence, and even our feminism will happily